The bustling city was alive with energy, its streets filled with people rushing to their destinations, lost in their thoughts and routines. Among them was Sarah, a young woman in her late 20s, her fiery red hair cascading down her shoulders, contrasting with the gray skies above. Sarah was an artist, a dreamer who had moved to the city to chase her passion for painting. She often wandered the streets, sketchbook in hand, capturing the city's essence through her art. One particularly dreary afternoon, as the rain poured down, Sarah found herself in a predicament. Her umbrella, old and battered, suddenly flipped inside out, leaving her exposed to the elements. She struggled to fix it, her frustration mounting as she became drenched in the downpour. "Need some help?" A voice called out from behind her. Startled, Sarah turned to find a man standing nearby, his umbrella large enough to shelter them both. He was tall, with dark hair that curled slightly at the ends, and his deep brown eyes were filled with warmth and concern. He smiled at her, offering the protection of his umbrella. "Thank you," Sarah replied, grateful for the kindness of a stranger. She stepped under the umbrella, feeling a rush of relief as the rain no longer drenched her. "I'm John," the man introduced himself, extending his hand. "Sarah," she responded, shaking his hand. His grip was firm yet gentle, and she couldn't help but notice the spark of connection that passed between them. As they walked together, the rain creating a rhythm on the umbrella above them, they began to talk. What started as small talk about the weather soon evolved into a deeper conversation. Sarah learned that John was an architect, passionate about designing buildings that blended beauty with functionality. He, in turn, was fascinated by her love for painting, intrigued by the way she saw the world through an artist's eyes. Their initial meeting lasted far longer than either had anticipated. By the time they reached Sarah's apartment building, they had exchanged phone numbers and a promise to see each other again. As Sarah waved goodbye and entered her apartment, she felt a flutter of excitement in her chest, a feeling she hadn't experienced in a long time. Over the next few weeks, Sarah and John began to see each other regularly. They met for coffee, visited art galleries, and explored the city's hidden gems together. Each encounter only deepened their connection, and it wasn't long before their casual meetings turned into something more. John was captivated by Sarah's vibrant personality, her laughter like music to his ears. He admired her ability to find beauty in the mundane, to see the world through a lens that turned the ordinary into something extraordinary. Sarah, on the other hand, found comfort in John's steady presence. He was thoughtful, kind, and attentive, a man who listened with genuine interest and cared deeply for those around him. As their relationship blossomed, they became inseparable. They would spend long evenings in Sarah's apartment, where she would paint while John worked on his architectural designs. Their conversations ranged from their dreams and ambitions to their fears and insecurities. They shared their hopes for the future, imagining a life filled with love, creativity, and mutual support. The more time they spent together, the more they realized that they had found something special. Their love was not a whirlwind romance, but a steady flame that grew stronger with each passing day. They were not just lovers, but also best friends, partners in every sense of the word. As their love deepened, so did their commitment to one another. After a year of dating, John and Sarah decided to take the next step in their relationship. They moved in together. They found a small but charming apartment in a quiet neighborhood, where the streets were lined with trees and the air was filled with the scent of blooming flowers. Their new home became a sanctuary, a place where they could escape the chaos of the city and focus on their shared life. The apartment was a reflection of their personalities, filled with artwork, books, and mementos from their adventures together. The walls were adorned with Sarah's paintings, vibrant and full of life, while John's architectural sketches were neatly framed and hung in the hallway. Their days were filled with a sense of contentment and routine. John would leave for work early in the morning, kissing Sarah goodbye before heading to his office. Sarah, who worked from home, would spend her mornings painting, the sunlight streaming through the windows as she lost herself in her art. In the evenings, they would reunite, cooking dinner together and sharing stories about their day. They began to talk about their future, marriage, a family, and a home of their own. John would often sketch out plans for their dream house, a beautiful structure with large windows, a spacious garden, and a studio for Sarah to paint in. Sarah would smile as she watched him work, imagining the life they would build together. Their love was strong, and they supported each other's dreams without hesitation. John encouraged Sarah to showcase her work in galleries, attending every exhibition with pride. Sarah, in turn, was John's biggest cheerleader, celebrating his successes and offering comfort during the inevitable challenges of his career. Their relationship was not without its challenges, of course. They had their disagreements, as all couples do, but they always found a way to resolve them. Their love was built on a foundation of trust, respect, and a deep understanding of each other. They knew that, no matter what, they would face life's challenges together. One evening, after a particularly romantic dinner, John proposed to Sarah. It was a simple yet heartfelt proposal, made in the warmth of their living room. He had designed the engagement ring himself, a delicate band with a small, sparkling diamond that symbolized their love, a love that was not ostentatious but rather pure and enduring. Tears filled Sarah's eyes as she said yes, her heart overflowing with joy. They held each other close, savoring the moment, knowing that their lives were about to change forever. They were not just partners anymore. They were about to become husband and wife. Their wedding was a small, intimate affair, held in a beautiful garden surrounded by their closest friends and family. The day was filled with laughter, love, and a sense of peace that only comes from knowing you are exactly where you are meant to be. As they exchanged vows, promising to love and support each other for the rest of their lives, there was not a doubt in either of their minds that they had found their forever. Life after their wedding continued to be filled with love and happiness. They settled into married life with ease, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. They continued to dream about their future, eagerly anticipating the day when they could start a family and build the life they had always envisioned. But fate had other plans. One fateful evening, as they were driving home from a gallery exhibition where Sarah's latest collection had been showcased, their lives were forever altered. The night was dark, the roads slick with rain, and visibility was poor. They were only a few miles from home when a car suddenly swerved into their lane, crashing into them head-on. The impact was devastating. The sound of metal crunching against metal filled the air, followed by the shattering of glass. The force of the collision threw Sarah and John forward, the seatbelts cutting into their bodies as the car spun out of control. When the car finally came to a stop, there was a deafening silence. The only sound was the rain pounding against the roof of the car, mingling with the distant wail of sirens approaching. John was the first to regain consciousness. Dazed and in pain, he turned to check on Sarah. His heart plummeted when he saw her slumped over in her seat, unconscious and covered in blood. Panic surged through him as he frantically called her name, but she didn't respond. The paramedics arrived quickly, pulling them from the wreckage and rushing them to the hospital. John was treated for minor injuries, a few broken ribs, cuts, and bruises, but his concern was solely on Sarah. He paced the waiting room, his heart pounding in his chest, praying for her to be okay. Hours passed before a doctor finally approached him. The news was grim. Sarah had sustained severe injuries, including damage to her spine. The doctor explained that the injury was likely to result in permanent paralysis from the waist down. John's world shattered in that moment, the weight of the news crashing down on him like a tidal wave. When Sarah finally regained consciousness, she was met with a reality that was too painful to comprehend. She could no longer feel her legs, no longer move as she once did. The vibrant, independent woman who had once danced through life was now confined to a wheelchair. The life she had known, the future she had dreamed of, was gone in an instant. John tried to be strong for her, to offer comfort and reassurance, but he was struggling too. The weight of the situation was overwhelming. He loved Sarah more than anything, but the fear, guilt, and helplessness were eating away at him. He didn't know how to cope with the new reality they were facing, and he began to withdraw into himself. As the weeks turned into months, the strain on their marriage became more apparent. Sarah was adjusting to life in a wheelchair, but it was a slow and painful process. She battled with feelings of anger, frustration, and depression, mourning the loss of her independence and the life she had once led. John, who had once been Sarah's rock, found himself struggling to cope with the reality of their new life. The accident had taken a toll on him too, but in a different way. He was consumed by guilt for being the one who suggested they drive home that night, guilt for not being able to protect Sarah, and guilt for the resentment he felt deep down. He tried to hide these feelings from Sarah, but the weight of them was becoming too much to bear. At first, John threw himself into caring for Sarah, determined to be the supportive husband she needed. He helped her with her physical therapy, made modifications to their home to accommodate her wheelchair, and tried to keep her spirits up. But as time went on, the demands of caregiving began to wear him down. The constant stress, the sleepless nights, and the emotional strain left him feeling drained and overwhelmed. Sarah could sense the change in John. He was no longer the loving, attentive husband she had married. He was distant, often lost in his thoughts, and quick to anger. Their once vibrant conversations had dwindled to awkward silences, and the warmth that had once filled their home was replaced by tension and unease. The strain on their marriage became undeniable. Sarah, feeling the loss of her autonomy, began to resent her dependence on John. She hated feeling like a burden, and she hated even more that John seemed to be pulling away from her. The emotional distance between them grew, and with it, the resentment on both sides. Arguments became more frequent, usually sparked by the smallest of things. John would come home late from work, too exhausted to engage with Sarah, and she would accuse him of neglecting her. He would snap back, frustrated by her accusations and the constant pressure he felt. Their fights were intense and hurtful, leaving both of them feeling more isolated than ever. Despite their struggles, there were moments when they tried to reconnect, when John would hold Sarah close and tell her that they would get through this, or when Sarah would reassure John that she still loved him despite everything. But these moments were fleeting, and the cracks in their relationship continued to widen. Sarah's art, which had once been her solace, now served as a painful reminder of what she had lost. She could no longer paint with the same ease and freedom, and her frustration only deepened her sense of loss. John, too, found little joy in his work, his creativity stifled by the emotional turmoil at home. The dreams they had once shared, of a family, a home filled with love and laughter, seemed like a distant memory. One night, after yet another argument, John found himself standing alone in their darkened living room. He looked around at the place that had once been a sanctuary, now filled with an oppressive sense of despair. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was suffocating, trapped in a life that no longer felt like his own. He loved Sarah, but the weight of their situation was crushing him. He felt like he was drowning, unable to find a way to stay afloat. The guilt he felt for even considering leaving her was overwhelming, but the thought of continuing to live this way seemed unbearable. After hours of pacing and thinking, John made a decision, one that would change both their lives forever. He convinced himself that Sarah would be better off without him, that she deserved someone who could give her the care and support he felt incapable of providing. He rationalized that by leaving, he would be setting her free, allowing her to find someone who could truly take care of her. The next morning, John put his plan into motion. He suggested they take a drive to a remote town he had heard about, a place where they could get away from the city and the constant reminders of the accident. Sarah, though surprised by the sudden idea, agreed, hoping that a change of scenery might help them reconnect. They drove for hours, the city gradually giving way to winding roads and dense forests. The town they eventually reached was small and isolated, nestled in the shadow of towering mountains. It was picturesque, with quaint cottages, a quiet town square, and a serene lake nearby. It was the kind of place that felt frozen in time, far removed from the hustle and bustle of modern life. They checked into a small inn, run by an elderly couple who welcomed them with warm smiles. The inn was cozy, with wooden beams and a fireplace crackling in the common room. Despite the beauty of the place, there was a tension between Sarah and John that they couldn't shake. That evening, they shared a meal in silence, the unspoken words hanging heavily in the air. The next morning, John told Sarah that he needed to run an errand in town and would be back shortly. He kissed her on the forehead, his heart heavy with the knowledge of what he was about to do. Sarah, though still feeling the strain in their relationship, trusted him and stayed behind at the inn, unaware of his true intentions. John drove away from the inn, his mind racing. He drove until the town was just a speck in the rearview mirror, until the winding road led him far away from the life he had known. He didn't look back, too afraid of what he might see if he did. When Sarah realized that John wasn't coming back, the reality of her situation hit her like a tidal wave. She was alone, in a remote town with no way to get back home. Her heart broke as she sat in her wheelchair, staring out the window, waiting for hours that turned into days. Days passed, and Sarah's initial disbelief gave way to a profound sense of abandonment. She couldn't understand how the man she had loved and trusted could leave her like this. The emotional pain was unbearable, compounded by the physical limitations that now defined her life. She felt trapped, not just in this remote town, but in a body that no longer obeyed her commands, and in a life that had been shattered beyond repair. The days that followed John's departure were the darkest of Sarah's life. Alone in the remote town, she was forced to confront the harsh reality of her situation. She was stranded, with no way to return to the life she had known. The once picturesque town now felt like a prison, its beauty a cruel contrast to the despair she felt inside. At first, Sarah was consumed by grief. She cried until there were no more tears left, her heart aching with a profound sense of loss. She couldn't understand how John, the man she had loved so deeply, could leave her in such a way. The betrayal cut deep, leaving her feeling abandoned, worthless, and utterly alone. But as the days turned into weeks, something within Sarah began to shift. She realized that if she was going to survive, she couldn't allow herself to be consumed by her sorrow. She had to find a way to move forward, even if it seemed impossible. With no one else to rely on, Sarah began to take small steps toward reclaiming her independence. She started by getting to know the elderly couple who ran the inn. They were kind and compassionate, sensing the pain she was in without prying into her personal life. They offered her assistance without pity, treating her with the respect and dignity she desperately needed. The innkeepers helped Sarah learn how to navigate the small town in her wheelchair. They introduced her to the locals, who welcomed her with open arms. Though the town was small, it was filled with good-hearted people who quickly came to admire Sarah's strength and resilience. They offered her work at the local art store, where she began teaching painting classes to children and adults alike. It wasn't much, but it gave her a sense of purpose. Slowly but surely, Sarah started to rebuild her life. She rediscovered her passion for painting, using art as a way to express her complex emotions. Her paintings became more powerful, filled with raw emotion and deep introspection. The small town, which had once felt like a prison, began to feel like a place of healing. Despite the progress she was making, Sarah couldn't fully shake the pain of John's betrayal. She still loved him, but she also knew she deserved better than what he had done to her. She was determined to keep moving forward, but the scars of his abandonment would remain with her for a long time. Meanwhile, John was struggling with the consequences of his decision. He had returned to the city, but nothing felt right anymore. He was haunted by memories of Sarah, her laughter, her smile, and the love they had once shared. The guilt he felt for abandoning her was overwhelming, and it began to eat away at him. He tried to immerse himself in his work, but his heart wasn't in it. Every building he designed reminded him of the home they had dreamed of building together. His life, which had once been filled with purpose, now felt empty and meaningless. He avoided friends and family, too ashamed to admit what he had done. The isolation only deepened his despair. One night, unable to sleep, John found himself looking through old photos of him and Sarah. The memories came flooding back, Their first meeting in the rain, the night spent talking about their dreams, and the moment he proposed to her. He realized, with a sickening clarity, that he had made the biggest mistake of his life. John knew he had to make amends, but the thought of facing Sarah after what he had done terrified him. He was afraid she would never forgive him, and he couldn't blame her if she didn't. But he also knew that he couldn't live with himself if he didn't at least try to make things right. Determined to find Sarah, John began searching for her. He had no idea where she might be, but he started by reaching out to the hospitals and rehabilitation centers where she might have gone for therapy. It took weeks of searching, but finally, he received a lead. A small town where a woman matching Sarah's description had been seen teaching art classes. John drove to the town with a heart full of hope and fear. As he approached the town, memories of the life they had shared flooded back, making his resolve waver. But he knew he had to see her, to apologize, and to beg for her forgiveness, no matter what the outcome. When John arrived at the town, he felt a mixture of relief and dread. He asked around and was directed to the art store where Sarah worked. Standing outside the store, he hesitated, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew that this moment would determine the rest of his life. Taking a deep breath, John walked into the store. The bell above the door chimed, and he saw her, Sarah, sitting behind a counter, her red hair cascading over her shoulders as she worked on a painting. She looked different, stronger somehow, but there was a sadness in her eyes that broke his heart. Sarah looked up when she heard the bell, and their eyes met. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The shock of seeing John again was overwhelming, and she felt a rush of emotions. Anger, sadness, confusion, and, despite everything, love. John walked slowly toward her, his eyes filled with regret. "Sarah," he said, his voice trembling, "I'm so sorry." Sarah didn't respond immediately. She just stared at him, trying to process the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside her. Finally, she spoke, her voice calm but laced with pain. "Why, John? Why did you leave me?" John's shoulders slumped, and he looked down, unable to meet her gaze. "I was scared, Sarah. I was overwhelmed by everything, by the accident, by seeing you in so much pain. I felt like I was drowning, and I thought you'd be better off without me." "Better off?" Sarah's voice cracked, and she shook her head in disbelief. "You abandoned me, John. You left me alone when I needed you the most." Tears welled up in John's eyes. "I know, and I hate myself for it. Not a day has gone by that I haven't regretted what I did. I was wrong, Sarah. I was weak and selfish, and I'm so sorry. I came back to beg for your forgiveness, but I know I don't deserve it." There was a long silence as Sarah looked at John, trying to decide what to say. She had imagined this moment so many times, replayed it in her mind with different outcomes. But now that it was happening, she wasn't sure how she felt. Part of her wanted to scream at him, to make him feel the pain she had felt. But another part of her saw the broken man standing before her, and she felt a deep sadness for him. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but firm. "John, you hurt me more than I ever thought possible. You broke my heart, and I don't know if I can ever fully forgive you. But I also know that holding on to this pain isn't helping me. I've learned to survive without you, to rebuild my life. But I can't forget what you did." John nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I understand, Sarah. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just needed to tell you how sorry I am and that I still love you more than anything in this world." The days following their confrontation were filled with reflection for both Sarah and John. They didn't see each other for a while after that first meeting, both needing time to process their emotions. Sarah continued with her work at the art store, while John stayed in the town, unsure of what to do next. But something had changed between them. The anger and resentment that had once defined their relationship were beginning to give way to something new: understanding. Sarah could see that John was truly remorseful, and though she was still hurt, she began to realize that holding on to that pain was only hurting her more. One day, after a particularly successful art class, Sarah decided to visit the inn where John was staying. She found him sitting by the lake, staring out at the water, lost in thought. She rolled her wheelchair up next to him, and they sat in silence for a while, watching the gentle ripples on the surface of the lake. "Why did you come back, John?" Sarah asked, breaking the silence. John sighed, still looking out at the water. "Because I couldn't live with myself for what I did. I couldn't stop thinking about you, about us, and the life we had planned. I realized that I'd rather spend my life making up for my mistakes than running away from them." Sarah nodded, her heart heavy but also lightened by his words. "I've changed, John. I'm not the same person I was before the accident. I'm stronger now, and I know what I want from life. I'm not sure if there's a place for you in it anymore, but I think we both need to let go of the past if we're ever going to move forward." John turned to look at her, his eyes filled with hope. "I understand, Sarah. I know I have no right to ask for anything from you. But if there's even a small chance that we could start over, I'd do anything to prove myself to you." Sarah thought about it for a long moment. She knew that forgiving John wouldn't be easy, and that rebuilding trust would take time. But she also knew that she still loved him, despite everything, and that maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to move forward together. "I'm willing to try," Sarah finally said, her voice steady. "But it's going to take time, and things will never be the same as they were. We'll have to start from the beginning, as two different people." John nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "I'm willing to do whatever it takes, Sarah. I love you, and I'll spend the rest of my life proving that to you." Over the next few months, Sarah and John began the slow process of rebuilding their relationship. It wasn't easy, and there were times when the pain of the past threatened to tear them apart again. But they were both committed to making it work, and they found strength in each other as they navigated their new reality. John decided to stay in the town, finding work as an architect for a small firm that specialized in restoring historic buildings. It wasn't the high-profile career he once had, but it brought him a sense of fulfillment that he hadn't felt in years. He also started volunteering at the local community center, helping with building projects and offering his expertise to those in need. Sarah continued her work at the art store, where she became a beloved figure in the community. Her art classes were always full, and her paintings began to gain recognition beyond the small town. She even had a few exhibitions in nearby cities, where her work was praised for its emotional depth and beauty. As they spent more time together, Sarah and John slowly began to heal the wounds of the past. They talked openly about their feelings, their fears, and their hopes for the future. There were still moments of pain, but they faced them together, knowing that they were stronger as a team. One evening, as they sat by the lake where they had first started to rebuild their relationship, John took Sarah's hand in his. "I know it's been a long journey, and we're not done yet, but I want you to know that I'm committed to this, to us. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Sarah, if you'll have me." Sarah looked at him, her heart full of love and hope. "I've seen how much you've changed, John, and I've changed too. I'm ready to move forward with you, to build a new life together. But we'll do it on our terms, one step at a time." With that, they made a silent promise to each other, one that was built on a foundation of trust, respect, and love. They knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but they were willing to face it together, hand in hand. And so, as the sun set over the lake, casting a warm, golden glow over the water, Sarah and John began a new chapter in their lives, one filled with hope, love, and the promise of a future they would build together. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed the story, and don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe for more delightful stories.